Your organization is among those 37 groups that have been banned by Israel from working in Gaza. Israel says these groups, including yours, have not complied with its new rules to supply personal information on those who work for you. The Israelis say this is to prevent the groups from being infiltrated by Hamas. How has this ban affected your operations? Have you now completely stopped operating in Gaza?
No, of course not. First of all, even the expiration of our registration, which is what's happened, we have a 60-day period to wind down. But this isn't the first obstruction that we faced by Israel. We're going to continue operating as much and as long as we can. Our teams on the ground throughout the occupied Palestinian territory are committed to continuing to respond to communities in need. So far, what we've seen as an impact is that international aid workers are not able to enter Gaza. So the internationals who have been supporting our local staff will no longer be able to enter. Already for 10 months, Israel has blocked all of our aid from directly bringing in our aid into Gaza. And so we anticipate that this will continue, of course, but our teams continue to respond, supporting people by providing over 100,000 people a day with clean drinking water, operating temporary learning spaces for children who were deprived of an education for 2 years, continuing to coordinate the shelter response as the lead agency for the shelter cluster, which is working with all of the different NGOs and the UN, providing shelter response, and much more work that our teams will continue to do despite these obstructions.
What is the aid that your organization is able to get into Gaza right now? Because there are reports that Israel has been blocking some of those aid trucks from crossing the Rafah border.
We have not been able to bring in any aid directly into Gaza since before March 2nd of last year. It's been more than 10 months. So even when we had registration that was intact, even after the ceasefire came into effect about almost 3 months ago, we still were not able to bring in aid. And the reason for the rejection after October 10th, when the ceasefire agreement came into effect, was that we were not authorized. So we saw that even though we had valid registrations, the Israeli authorities were still using the registration process as an excuse to prevent us from bringing in aid. 16 of the 17 rejections that we received since October 10th were based on the fact that we were not authorized to bring in aid, and the 17th rejection just simply said reject.
It is midwinter right now. It's also the rainy season. Temperatures are dropping across the region. What are your biggest needs right now, and are you able to fulfill some of them?
Shelter is a huge concern, and it's not just about providing emergency shelter. About 1.3 million people remain in need of emergency shelter after 80% of Gaza's buildings were destroyed, hundreds of thousands of housing units damaged or destroyed. It's firstly about getting in emergency shelter supplies, tents, tarpaulins, timber and framing materials, which have been barred from entering for years now. But it's also about getting in the heavy machinery that's needed to clear rubble, to make more space for displacement sites, to dig drainage channels, because Gaza is very prone to flooding and people are living very close to sea level and close to the sea. And so flooding has been a huge issue. Being able to mitigate and remove both sewage and trash and other solid waste. And so in order to do that, we need supplies, we need tools, we need heavy machinery, and that is not entering at all, and we need much more. And so people are freezing. We've already seen several babies die as a result of exposure this winter alone. We saw many die last year as well. We've seen people die as buildings have collapsed because people are trying so hard to stay out of tents and off the ground, that they're living in buildings that are just structurally unsound after so much destruction. And so we need to get in emergency shelter supplies. We need to see them entering at a scale that we have not seen. And we need to make sure that those supplies that are entering are up to humanitarian standards, because we've seen donor governments who have been trying to respond to the crisis, bringing in materials that aren't really suitable for the weather conditions in Gaza, and as a result require reinforcement with additional tarps if they aren't waterproof, and they really aren't fit for the harsh winters that people in Gaza face, where it's very windy, it's very rainy, and it's very cold.
Shaina, is there still a big Israeli military presence in the areas where you are operating? Because under the terms of the ceasefire, the Israeli military was required to move east to a line east on the eastern side of Gaza.
We're only operating in the western part of Gaza, but of course we're still hearing about bombardments happening on a regular basis within those areas where most of the civilians in Gaza remain. And so even though our teams are not coming into direct contact, and the people that we serve in those areas are not coming into direct contact with Israeli forces, we're still seeing nearly daily violations of the ceasefire, where people are being killed either close to the yellow line, which demarcates where Israel has withdrawn, but also in the areas where Israel was supposed to withdraw, and the vast majority of civilians remain.
Shaina, the United Nations World Food Programme says food supplies entering Gaza are not enough. Most families only get one meal a day. How dire is the situation, especially among children, many of whom, most of whom, I would say, are suffering from malnutrition?
Well, the situation, as WFP has said, remains dire. I believe it's about 1 in 4 families that still is relying on only one meal per day. Our staff are still hungry, and even though we've seen an increase of commercial trucks entering, most people do not have an income and cannot afford the food that is entering. They simply cannot afford the prices, and that is why it's critical, in addition to restoring Gaza's markets, that humanitarian agencies are there and able to continue to respond, able to continue to provide food. At the Norwegian Refugee Council, we've started supporting bakeries in Gaza City, helping to subsidize the cost of bread so that people can afford it. And so rather than, as Claire said, rather than removing us, they should be allowing us at this point to scale up, because the needs remain dire. People are still hungry, people are still in need, and yet what we've seen is continuous obstruction over the last 2 years that simply has not stopped, despite calls not only from the UN, not only from the international NGO community, but from diplomats as well. And we need to see increased pressure put on Israel to lift these restrictions, to ensure that Israel abides by its obligations under international law to facilitate impartial humanitarian relief. This, as Claire said, is not optional. This is their requirement. The International Court of Justice was very clear back in October with what Israel's obligations were, and that was to allow us to continue to work.